And we're live. It is Tuesday, August 17th, 2021, 5:01 p.m. I can barely see the screen because of the glare from the setting sun in the undisclosed location where I am vacationing. If you hear music in the background, it's because I'm sitting at an outdoor bar so that you guys can have the beautiful view of the uh, harbor behind me. Scott is in New York, back in the main room, having reclaimed it from uh, his invasive species family, which
Yeah,
overtook it for a while.
yeah. Jesus Christ, what the hell?
And we are joined by Marc Polymeropoulos for the third time. This is the third time you've done the show with us. And many of you know Mark because of his experiences and advocacy with Havana syndrome and directed energy weapons. And along the way, it may have come up, or I'm not sure if it did, but it may have come up that he actually served a number of times in Afghanistan when he was with the CIA. And he has been about as worked up about the last few days as I have, maybe more so. Um, and so I asked him to come on and give us a bit of a primer on the rage and anger he feels. So, Mark, we are not allowed to have fun anymore, and I wish you were here under happier circumstances. But welcome back. Why don't you start by giving us an overview to the extent you can, consistent with classified material, of how you came to be in Afghanistan and what sort of stuff you were doing there
Sure.
and who you were working with?
Sure. Well, it's first of all, it's great to be back. Again, I love the show, and one of the things that I was really excited about today is that we'd have considerable amount of time to talk about this. I've been doing some media. I've been quoted in the Washington Post. I did at Fox News. But these are all small sound bites. This is an opportunity to really kind of do a deep dive on what has occurred and what I think are the effects of what has been a pretty awful couple days. But first and foremost, so I served 26 years at the CIA. I started out, I actually, was recruited from the agency right out of grad school, and the first job that I had was on the Afghan account in 1993, and so I had a front row seat to a brutal civil war in Afghanistan. This was, obviously after the Soviets withdrew with the fall of the communist led regime of Najibullah, and the Afghan, the disparate Afghan groups really going at it, and then in 1994, the Taliban were created. In 1996, they took over. So at the beginning of my agency career, I was actually working on Afghanistan. I ended up as a operations officer going into Afghanistan in early 2002. I think it was February or March, to Kandahar. And then I wasn't on one of the first teams in, but it was one of the earlier teams. And so I certainly saw the birthplace. Or not the birthplace, or certainly the home of Mullah Omar. I remember going to his compound. And then in 2011 and 2012, as I became more senior, I served as one of our base chiefs in a paramilitary base along the Pak-Afghan border, which is one of the most dangerous locations on the planet. So I spent a year there. And that was really primarily counterterrorism in our fight against the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. And so I really had a unique view of Afghanistan, over a large portion of my career. And then as someone who also worked counterterrorism, Afghanistan was always, even in other operational tours and postings, or even at headquarters, it was always at the forefront of everyone's mind because of the counterterrorism fight. So ultimately, it's an area, a region where I spent a lot of time. I think that one of the frustrations I've had as I've watched all the talking heads is. And there's a lot of great Americans, men and women who served in Afghanistan, but it maybe was for brief snippets of time, not really understanding the history of the country, the culture of the Afghan people, how they do transitions. The idea that what's just happened is the Afghan army ultimately dissolving and the government quitting. Well, that's what happens in the last 30 years of transitions in Afghanistan. It always goes that way. So I'm happy to be here today. Ask me any questions and we can talk in detail about this. It's just, and let me also say, there are far more more accomplished intelligence officers, both in and out of government, particularly at CIA, who have spent even more time in Afghanistan than I. And so we'll talk about maybe this idea of an intel failure, because I really push back against that. I think, the bench we have in the CIA is extraordinary when it comes to Afghanistan. And so happy to be here, and let's talk about what happened.
All right, so let's start with what happened. How surprised were you by it? As recently as a month ago, the president was saying, I don't expect to see the Afghan government dissolve and the Taliban march into Kabul. You also had, as recently as a week or two ago, very respected analysts like Jonathan Schroden saying, the Taliban have been impressive so far, but they haven't taken any cities yet. This could be a real urban-rural divide situation. How surprised were you both by the fact of the Taliban takeover and by the speed of it?
So, it's easy for me to talk right now after it's all said and done. But to be honest, I was not surprised, and I'll tell you why. And I think it had a lot to do with with some of the really poor policy decisions and the poor communication strategy of the administration. So, ultimately, war is won and lost. And I always have said this, based on hope on the battlefield. And the administration is kind of constant gaslighting of the Afghans and shaming them, I think, really had a profound effect. And the reason why it's even more important in Afghanistan is because, as I said before, knowing of the history of the last 30 years of multiple government transitions, Afghans switch sides all the time. It was just part of the culture. There's kind of an old adage, rent an Afghan, and I don't like that. It's a little insulting, but the bottom line is they're survivors. So the Mujahideen groups, when you go back even until the 90s, were aligning themselves, with one or the other. Dostum, the famous northern warlord, at one point fought for the communists. And so the idea, when we start gaslighting the Afghans and give them no hope, essentially saying the U.S. is not going to come to your aid and your side, to me, that provided an incredible accelerant. And I remember seeing when it started happening, and I started getting worried. Now, of course, it's easy for me now to talk about this because, all the events that have occurred, but I was not terribly surprised, just knowing the history of Afghanistan, and of course also having been there so much, knowing that the fact of the matter is the Afghan army was not that capable. I would think the specialized units, and I have to be careful on how they say this, that perhaps were aided by the special operations forces, the intelligence community were and are very good. But it was known by all that the Afghan National Army was not very capable, and so none of this is a terrible surprise to me. And I think it was just regrettable because our rapid withdrawal, coming earlier, this kind of strange idea that we had to abide by the Doha Agreement, which the Taliban was violating, all kind of led to this this cascade of events where things moved rather quickly. And I'll tell you, when you think about the intelligence reports, and I'm reading this from press. But ultimately, when an intelligence assessment says, Kabul may fall within 30 days, that's the light blinking red. That is serious. So that's not like saying that the Afghan GDP is bad, or the trade deficit of Afghanistan is a little shaky. So if you're a policymaker and you see that, you don't start quibbling over what time and day they're going to fall. Something's really wrong. And so ultimately, I guess back to the original question, I wasn't terribly surprised.
Part of it, we were having technical issues. I think Ben disconnected, and he's reconnecting. But can I ask you about it? First of all, it's great to talk to somebody who's clearly an expert. So I just want to say it's nice to talk to somebody who knows what they're talking about. But are you suggesting that there really wasn't an intelligence failure? It's that there was a failure on the part of A, policymakers, and B, the public/media misinterpreting what the intelligence language and terminology. Is that it?
Well, intelligence, it's certainly imprecise. The idea of being predictive in terms of the exact time and date of a country falling. But again, going back to the idea of, worst case scenario, this could happen in 30 days. That's pretty serious. But I think ultimately this is a function of an administration, and it is the president's call. But he wanted to get out, and the Doha agreement. So part of the stipulations of the agreement were that if the Taliban were violating the agreement, there was we would kind of go back to the drawing board. Well, they were, but we still seem to want to adhere to that. And so, look, the administration certainly made the call to get out. They accelerated it early, and they did so without the planning that would necessitate both the safe evacuation of our embassy and U.S. officials, the safe evacuation of 60 to 80,000 Afghan allies, and most importantly, or not most importantly, actually, there's the moral part of the Afghan allies piece, but just as important, the idea of trying to salvage some kind of residual CT capability. You really saw over the last several weeks, there was trips you saw around the region of senior USG officials scrambling for basing access for ISR. I mean, this is not the way to run a railroad. And I think, some of the comments I made in the press, I'll reiterate again, I was an enormous critic of the Trump administration because I thought there was a junior varsity team in charge. And I was very encouraged, especially with the Biden national security team. So I'm actually both surprised and disappointed at how bad they bungled this. It's odd to me, and it's something that I still, to this day, to right now, I can't get my hands around. These are really experienced national security professionals who clearly, made some big mistakes here.
But before you jump in,
do you think?
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Scott.
I was just going to say, just so I understand, you're not on the we should have stayed. You're on the it's the way we left.
No,
right?
actually, no. I'm on the resigned to a policy that the commander-in-chief decided that we should leave, and that's what I'm commenting on now. My true belief is 2.5 to 3,000 U.S. forces, which is going to be made up of special operations, the intelligence community, could easily have stayed, and that to me is something that, of course, the intelligence community and the U.S. military advocated. Now President Biden does have the last say. So I think he wanted out. But if it had been up to me, you certainly would have kept that residual that capability on the ground, which I think it would be hard to argue that you would see the same scenes right now if we had done that in the past. And ultimately, America is less safe now because we don't have a transitional Afghan government. We have an Afghan government that is going to be led by the Taliban. We have no partner anymore. We lost our only ally in Central Asia. There is no Afghan NDS, their intelligence service. These are institutions we would have relied on to assist us with intelligence reporting on, perhaps terrorists reconstituting under Taliban areas. We have nothing now. So, it's almost not necessarily going in the dark, but you make us more safe. So I was always an advocate for leaving 2.5 to 3,000. I have said all the time in my career, the special operations community and the CIA are forward-facing units. I don't deploy. We are always deployed. We are supposed to be there. I would have no problem if you said we have to stay in Afghanistan with a small SOF, an IC presence for 15, 20 years. That's what we do. And if that's going to enable us to have, to make the best of a bad situation, that's fine. But it's certainly better than what we have today.
Go, Ben. Okay. So I'm sorry. So is the idea that you want to have 2.5 to 3,000 special operations, American covert officers in a country ruled by the Taliban?
No. We've passed that. We've passed that now. So I'm certainly not advocating for that now. I'm talking about what I would have preferred to have been the policy decision to declare that we are going home. And you keep that residual force there, and you still end up with this. Negotiating with the Taliban. In Doha for some kind of transitional power sharing, which was part of the entire process. But instead, we have a situation where we have lost everything, and so. I think that ship has sailed. The only thing we have to do now is obviously get the Afghan allies out. And in reality, I see no appetite from this administration of certainly doing anything other than that.
Okay. So given the policy of withdrawal by a date certain, what could have been done to do it better? how much of this is an execution problem, and how much of this is a underlying policy problem? Had you been advising the president, was the fundamental problem here that they didn't extend past September 11th and they did it in a rush? Or was the fundamental problem that the Afghan government actually could not be expected to hold up without sustained ongoing U.S. military support?
Well, it's a bit of both. Look, let's start with the latter. There's no doubt. I mean, clearly that the Afghans needed us, and so I also have a bit of a different take on this. You know, I recognize after all my time in the third world, you know, working with indigenous units, they're never going to be perfect. There is incredible corruption, but you know, this is the best of a bad lot that we have. So yes, there are so many things wrong with the Afghan government. Corruption was endemic. You know, obviously you saw, you know, what happened with Ghani and he fled. And sometimes we wish we would have better partners, but sometimes we don't have better partners. And so, you know, so you're making the best of a bad situation. And you know, and that's just the gray that I lived in. You know, the idea that we would have, you know, an Afghan government free of corruption, you know, upholding some of the same standards that we have in the West. That's just that of course is something to strive for, but that's fanciful. And so my job at the agency was always to work with, you know, with governments like this. And sometimes it's not fun, and sometimes it's unpalatable. Sometimes we can't if there's some, you know, if there's terrible human rights abuses. But the bottom line is, you know, we were going to have to deal and frankly support and prop up this Afghan government. So that's where those 2.5 to 3,000, I think, at least in the short term, could have helped. So again, you know, I'm not talking 20 years. I'm talking in a 1 to 5 year span. You know, and maybe we could have avoided this and still say we're up, you know, we're out and done. I mean, combat operations are over. So I think that's really important. You know, now Ben, you know, you talked about the kind of the stipulations of the Doha Agreement. Again, you're 100% right. So the Taliban were violating these stipulations. We could have easily said that date of September 11th could be pushed forward. But you know, for some reason, the administration was pointing to that while the Taliban was violating that, you know, wildly. And so I think that's something, you know, important to note.
What were the nature of their violations? I mean, the agreement never required them not to attack Afghan government forces. They weren't supposed to be attacking our people. As far as I know, they weren't. So what were they doing that violated that agreement that would have justified our doing so?
So I think there, you know, it was some of the violence on the ground, but it was also, you know, their continued support for terrorist groups, you know, inside the country. You know, their inability to kind of break from Al Qaeda and other groups, which, you know, there's, again, I got it, you know, I don't have access to this information, but certainly that's, you know, what I've read in the press, and frankly, just, I mean, I think administration officials or intelligence officials or even diplomatic officials, they all will agree that the Taliban were violating these terms, and so, but the U.S. just kept looking away, and so ultimately, that's just that means it's a policy decision that we're going to get out no matter what, and that date is sacrosanct, and that to me was always something that I didn't quite understand. But you know, that's something that certainly the Trump administration started. And the Biden administration, you know, somewhat surprisingly to a lot of us, you know, kept. And you know, one of the things that, and you know, it's never fun to kind of, you know, pinpoint officials by name, but you know, even the negotiating team in Qatar, you know, the negotiating team with the Taliban, you know, the Biden for some reason kept the same individuals. Zalal Khalilzad, the same individuals under the Trump administration, he kept them in the Biden administration, and that I think to a lot of people was kind of a head scratcher as well. And so, you know, I think there's going to be a lot of history books written on this, you know, from many different angles. Obviously, the kind of the military aspect of it. I mean, the training program for the Afghan National Army, the corruption, of course. But even on the diplomatic side, you know, what happened in Doha over, you know, from when the Trump administration began the talks, and the famous Mike Pompeo, you know, Secretary of State Pompeo, photo with Mullah Berater. Pretty ironic now as you see Pompeo on press, you know, on TV going crazy. I think there's a lot that's going to be kind of dissected on this, and really kind of poor diplomacy on our part. It's almost a diplomacy of desperation that we just wanted out under any circumstance.
So is this best understood as a Biden administration failure, a Trump administration failure that Biden inherited and for one reason or another couldn't extricate himself, or as a bipartisan cross-presidential failure?
I think the last part, like Mike Morrell said it best, in an interview recently. He said, this is a failure on multiple administrations, and so I think it is pretty disingenuous to blame it all on President Biden now, because obviously he kind of took the policy of President Trump and ran with it, and so but look, you can go back to the Obama troop surge. And there is an argument to be made, and that I think that there's a lot of legitimacy there, as we were there for 2 decades. Is that the original intent of counterterrorism mission? Things went kind of astray, and as usual, and in America's foreign entanglements, all for good reasons. The idea of nation building. We want to make Afghanistan a better place. It's almost that's the nature of I would say the American foreign policy establishment. I was a member of that. It's a good thing. We want to make Afghanistan better. But ultimately, I think that we have to be careful as we, as history is not going to judge that. The core mission of counterterrorism, I would argue, in Afghanistan, certainly, and for what the CIA wanted to do, was reached. There were not further, mass attacks on U.S. soil. If you remember, after 9/11, there was incredible fears that there were more waves. So what we did in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and killing a lot of Al Qaeda members and really degrading core Al Qaeda. That was a success, and then clearly we kind of lost our way a little bit by staying kind of too long with these large numbers of U.S. forces. I mean, I think that ultimately it could have been done in much lower levels. And again, I would argue that what could have been was a much smaller special operations and intelligence community presence that could have at least sustained the Afghan government. We could have sustained some CT pressure. To ensure that terrorist groups don't form. Make no mistake, outside in Bagram today, the part one, it was yesterday, maybe in the last 36 hours, there was a prison. The Taliban, captured a prison and let out 5,000 to 7,000 hardcore Taliban and Al Qaeda members. That's really bad. For the counterterrorism community, that is as bad as it gets. And so Al Qaeda is going to have a presence there now. We have a big problem on our hands. So long-winded answer to your question before.
Can I push back on that? Because so first of all, you're very articulate and you make an excellent you present your position excellently. So I want to push back and just say maybe it is not the role of the United States to build nations in far-flung countries, and it's like not our role to do that. It's not only a bad idea, but it creates a lot of pathologies, both domestic and foreign. But I guess I want to. So one of the things that's so interesting is that I live in New York City, and New York City experienced a very pronounced drop in the homicide rate starting from the early 90s up until 2-3 years ago, and nobody knows why. That is, there are lots of different theories as to is it first it was broken windows policing, stop and frisk, and then it was led in the war. Abortions were legal in 1973, and there were lots of different theories, and we don't know. We don't know in our front yard why things happen. We're taking an army and we're going around the world. We're fighting in a completely alien culture, alien in the sense that we're not familiar. It's not familiar to us, and yet we think that this is going to solve or ameliorate the problem when we don't even know what the relationship between cause and effect is, not just in crime, but certainly in counterterrorism. So I guess I feel like I'm always surprised that counterterrorism people feel so sure about what they do when crime prevention experts aren't sure what they're supposed to do at home. Do you see what I'm saying?
So yeah, no, so I do, and let me respond in a couple. First of all, I love having this discussion. So don't, and you're as qualified as anybody to have this discussion. Just because I was, I did some unique things doesn't make me an expert. I have just a unique experience. So look, let me just be clear. I was not arguing for the nation building concept. What I was saying is when we've gone into countries in the CT mission, that mission creep just happens, and I say that because. And I really mean this, of the goodness of the United States. So when we say we want to make Afghanistan better, maybe we shouldn't have done that, but it's done for the altruistic reasons of what we believe in. And so I think that's going to be something that in the future, and we are going to have foreign entanglements, and we are going to have to go to war and sometimes invade other countries. And it sounds terrible, but let's keep in mind our experiences in Afghanistan, in Libya, in Iraq. And so, and I think that so in the end, hopefully we'll learn from history. In terms of kind of counterterrorism, this is going to sound kind of brutal and frank, and again, this is based on my decades of being in Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria and Lebanon and a whole bunch of nasty places. I do believe in an aggressive counterterrorism policy, and for lack of a better better terms, I kind of adhere to the Israeli model that we have to go kill our foes, and sometimes we have to do that proactively. And I think that has been very effective for the United States. One can debate this, but I think we do so, especially in the intelligence community, with the kind of precision that the U.S. military in a large scale campaign would not. This is just that's my belief, my experience. I've been face to face with Al Qaeda and the Taliban and Hezbollah and all sorts of really bad characters over the years, and I do believe we have to have an aggressive posture. That's me, and that's also not to say that there's not risk versus gain. So the idea of doing some of the things that we do really aggressively, there is a cost to this sometimes. Sometimes there will be, and I would argue it's much more rare than is portrayed, civilian casualties. Sometimes it's, we will gain enemies from doing some of the things that we do. One of the most refreshing things I ever saw was how the Israelis do this. And I've worked with the Israeli government. And so when they decide to undertake counterterrorism action, they do something that we don't do. They're very clear to their policymakers. They'll say, we're going to do this, and this is going to be the effect. We might go kill a terrorist somewhere, but you know what? We might lose an embassy. And that provides the policymaker a pretty stark choice on if they want to go through with this. And so I think you do have to you have to have open eyes in terms of counterterrorism policies on the gains. And I would argue there are a lot of gains about being aggressive, but also on the cost of this. But let's go all the way back to the original question. I'm not advocating for nation building. My point was, I think that just because it's the goodness of the American people that we kind of get sucked into this. And it just happens time and time again. And so I think we have to really be cautious in the future.
I actually think it's the opposite. It's the fickleness of the American people that gets us sucked into something and then has us withdraw. It's actually, one of the huge problems about nation building is the fact that we don't have the political, whether it's a good idea or not, there's no domestic political will to see it through.
Yeah.
We're not even interested in building our own nation. It's not exactly clear to me, how effective we are in other countries. I would just also say, what we're talking about here is going to Central Asia to fight, not fighting in our neighborhood of what the Israelis are doing. And so it's a different story. And I would just say, and I just want to, I know this is a hard thing to say, but it may be that counterterrorism people don't know how it works, because the crime prevention people don't know how it works at home. And I think part of the zeitgeist here is that 20 years is too much. We don't know what we're doing. Let's get out. Just because it's clearly not working. I think that's like the zeitgeist.
I think that the comparison though with crime misses one key point. I believe in rehabilitation, in the U.S. criminal justice system. I don't believe in rehabilitation when it comes to counterterrorism. I've been face to face with some really nasty, Al Qaeda and Taliban members, and that you cannot rehabilitate them like you can, someone who commits a crime in the American city.
Mark, all I meant was when you have very complex social phenomenon, the question of the explanation of it is very complicated. Sure. And so that's all I meant to say.
Sure,
so
sure.
That's all I meant to say. But I don't have. Do I have the power to bring Genevieve in? Genevieve, you want to come in?
Sure.
Oh, okay, because I thought you were in the chorus, so I couldn't unmute you. Okay.
No, I'm here.
Okay.
So my question for you, Mark, is how concerned should we be about the reports that the Taliban have acquired various biometric databases and equipment, so like fingerprint scans, iris scans, and facial recognition, especially for women?
So I'm extremely concerned about this, and I think that my old colleagues are as well, for a variety of reasons. First, that look, right now the Taliban are going on this charm offensive. I think they gave press conferences, they're saying all the right things, but again, having seen them rise to power in 1994. Seeing them take power in 96, the 5 years of kind of the reign of terror there, and this is really kind of medieval, Islamic extremist caliphate. I think they're going to go on a campaign of retribution, and it's great, and I love Clarissa Ward, and she's wonderful, and I know her, and seeing her report from on CNN from Kabul is really interesting, and things seem okay. But that's Kabul. It's a very large country. I think behind the scenes, the Taliban are going to be really brutal and repressive, and they're going to use any means in their power in terms of kind of hunting down those who work with the Americans. And so all that biometric data is out there. I think that and again, this is going back into just I think the goodness of the American people. I think there is a enormous fear for the future of women in Afghanistan, and I say this because of my experience in battling the Taliban face to face, and also when I saw what they did in their 5 years from 96 to 2001. We still have 60 to 80,000 Afghan allies and their families who are stuck inside Afghanistan. That's a staggering number, and I think people are really scared. All the reports that I see and that I'm getting on a personal personal anecdotes from friends of mine who are in contact with folks is they are going house to house and searching for those who helped the United States. And this is not those who helped the CIA. This is those who helped AID. These are those who were journalists, female journalists. I think there is an enormous fear, and so I think we have to be really careful on getting into this lulled in this sense of complacency with what is the kind of the charm offensive by the Taliban right now. Only kind of days after entering Kabul, I think there are some really brutal times ahead, and maybe I'll be wrong. I don't think I will be. Because ultimately I was up against this group, and it is a truly horrible medieval organization. This is not just a transfer of power to a leftist insurgency in Central America, which the United States wasn't friends with. This is a transfer of power into a really brutal regime, which has the potential to do some extraordinary harm, to kind of the good people of Afghanistan. So I'm pretty concerned.
Okay, Christopher, first of all, are you there, Christopher?
Yes, I'm here.
Christopher. Oh, first of all, great to see you, although I can't see you now. I hope you seem well,
yes,
which I'm so glad about. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Good to see you, Mark. Too bad it's not under great circumstances between Afghanistan and the Nats summer. So my first question would be, what was actually achievable in Afghanistan after bin Laden was taken out in Pakistan? And if we say that the mission in Afghanistan was to prevent Al Qaeda or other sort of terrorist groups from using Afghanistan as a base to attack America in the West, how is that ever anything more than sort of a gentleman's agreement with the Taliban?
Well, I don't think there was ever any agreement with the Taliban. I think their whole idea is that we degraded core Al Qaeda both in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And that when I say core Al Qaeda, it's not its leaders; it's also its foot soldiers. We had deliberate counterterrorism policies that killed a lot of Al Qaeda members, so they would not be able to plot against the West. And make no mistake, and there is a difference between the Taliban and Al Qaeda. When we talk about Taliban, this is a brutal, medieval group. But they do not have designs to kill Americans, other than the Americans who are in their country. They don't have designs to hit our embassies, in Asia and Africa. Huge difference for Al Qaeda and other kind of more global extremist or Islamic terrorist groups. And so. I think that ultimately, there was a time where we probably could have said that the counterterrorism mission was in essence completed, and in fact, we did in a sense. There was the troop surge under Obama, but we've gone down to certain numbers in the 10,000s, and so when President Trump said he wants out of Afghanistan, I think a lot of people shook their head. The troop numbers were very low there, and then when we talk about going down to 2,500, we're in essence, we were done already. The war is already over, and so I think that the counterterrorism mission, almost becomes almost a blocking strategy where you're there, we're assisting our Afghan partners. We still have the capability of ISR and kinetic strikes, when we see any kind of renewal of terrorist activity. But ultimately, the idea of the 100,000+ American forces that's a ship that sailed a long time ago, and nobody would advocate for that. Again, I think that there is going to be some really good books, but more importantly, good lectures in universities on what was the did we have to go to zero, or could we have left this residual force? And I think that's it's a very good question. It's a very fair question to ask. And I don't like what I heard from National Security Advisor Sullivan or President Biden last night, that there was this binary choice of staying and fighting the Taliban with huge numbers versus going down to zero. That residual number, I think, could have been sustained for at least maybe 1 to 5 years, which again is better off than where we are right now.
Can I ask you, because since you were there in a way at the beginning of this story,
right.
So what is your understanding of why the Taliban made a deal with Al Qaeda and bin Laden to use Afghanistan as a base, and then whether that reason no longer applies now 25 years later? I'm curious.
Well, first of all, they never broke that agreement, so they've always had that agreement. Al Qaeda is, it has been in Afghanistan and still is. I think we're going to see it in bigger numbers now because of the prison releases, because you might see movement of kind of core Al Qaeda from Iran back to Afghanistan. But ultimately, these are all individuals. This goes back even to before. This goes back to the fight against the Mujahideen. This goes back to the fight against the Soviet occupation. So the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, and there was obviously internal Afghan resistance movements made up of 7 kind of different parties, and so they were fighting the Soviet Union. Obviously, everyone knows that the United States had a big covert action plan working with the Pakistani government. We were never doing this directly. All the aid went through the government of Pakistan to aid these some of these 7 groups. What you had on the side, though, as well, was the Afghan Arabs, and these are individuals, probably tens of thousands, who came from all over the Arab world to kind of to help fight and eliminate the Soviet Union. To kick out the Soviet Union from Afghanistan, and that's how these groups met. And so it kind of goes back to those times, kind of the shared goal of ejecting the Soviet Union from Afghanistan. And so ultimately, Osama bin Laden finds a shelter after he was kicked out of Sudan, I believe, in Afghanistan. But it's based on these shared experiences from the original Afghan war. And so it just and again, it's Al Qaeda and the Taliban are different. The Taliban is this kind of medieval form of Islam, but again, it's not also all that different from the Taliban. And I'll just kind of add, one thing to kind of throw the conversation into crazy disarray is never forget there was 3 countries that recognized the Taliban in 1996. They've only been internationally recognized by 3 countries, and that was Saudi Arabia, it was Pakistan, and it was the UAE. And so it's kind of interesting to see that those countries that were okay with supporting or at least providing legitimacy to the Taliban back in 1996.
All right. If I could ask the second question, which maybe is a little delicate, but isn't part of we talk a lot about honoring the sacrifice of our troops and our fallen intel officers. Of course, you know many of them who have the stars on the wall.
Right.
Um, isn't part of honoring that sacrifice having an exit plan that where we don't stay forever. We knew that Afghanistan and Iraq was never going to be like Korea or Germany or Japan, where we have permanent bases for decades. Um, is this kind of more of a question about how we left versus like the timing of it, or sort of the inevitability of us drawing down troops?
So look, and I've thought a lot about this, of course, with the events that have occurred. So first and foremost, I have lost friends and colleagues in Afghanistan. I've also, been in charge of units, of indigenous units, where we've lost some great and heroic Afghans. I would never say that any of their, and I'm not saying you're saying this, but I would never say that any of their sacrifices were in vain, because the CT mission was the right mission there to do. And so, like, everyone is going to react differently, either if the Gold Star families or those of us who lost colleagues in processing this. But ultimately, we don't go to war, we don't go to conflict, with the guarantee that we're going to come out on top. And so I think that's something that's really important. I think the mission there, the counterterrorism mission, was very honorable. The friends who I lost, I hope their families still feel a great sense of pride. I certainly do for what they did, because ultimately, at the end of the day, and this is talking for CIA, I'm very proud of the fact that we were so integral and frankly, killing and degrading, Al Qaeda to an extent where the United States could not be hit again overseas. Now, it's not to say that Al Qaeda is, was defeated, because I think we have a problem again. But in terms of, we don't go into conflict. At least I'm talking about as a CIA officer, as someone from the U.S. military. You don't go into a conflict, with the idea that there's going to be this end game. The country has called us to do a job, and we do that to the best of our ability. And I celebrate, the men and women who certainly served, but also who paid the ultimate sacrifice. And I don't want to kind of think about what the last 72 hours. I don't want that to define them. It's one of the most interesting things that I and it's a whole separate issue, because I have my own health issues, and I was at Walter Reed today, and it's incredible, kind of the feeling there amongst the service members, many of whom, of course, have been certainly severely injured in Afghanistan. I think there's a lot of conflicting emotions about this, but what I said to them today, and what I would say to any of my colleagues, and really, difficult conversations with families, with Gold Star families, is that nobody's sacrifice was in vain. That that their service in Afghanistan was for a noble cause. And ultimately, sometimes things don't work out. Policymakers make poor choices. Obviously, I think we stayed there too long in big numbers. The nation building. We were talking about that before. Was certainly was not something that we should have tried to tackle. But I really don't want to. In all my service, I never thought of where the end game kind of what it meant. It was sitting there with your kind of brothers and sisters to the left and right of you. And you kind of do the best you can, and sometimes people don't come home, and it's really a truly awful thing. But I think that that kind of the core counterterrorism mission in Afghanistan was a noble one, and maybe that's the way that I kind of process this.
Can you unmute Ben?
It won't let. It won't let.
Can I, Paula? Can you unmute yourself? Oh, Paula, I'm sorry. We're experiencing some technical difficulty. Sorry about that. John, can you? Okay, please come in.
Okay, so Mark, I'm a pragmatist, and so this is really forward-looking. I don't mean to minimize the value of looking back on the past and learning from our mistakes, Those are really important things. But in the next 2 weeks before the August 31st alleged deadline, what is the most we can reasonably expect the U.S. to do beyond the four corners of the Kabul airport? Is it reasonable in any way to expect our military to go into Afghanistan or into the city of Kabul, escort people to the airport, or do anything else? What can we salvage? Because the plight of the women and girls in Afghanistan and all these other people who have, depended on us is really severe.
So I think that the pressure has built this, and this is kind of one of the beauties of social media right now. There has been some incredible work done by some former U.S. military veterans who have, and one a guy I've gotten to know, Matt Zeller, who runs an organization or ran an organization, No One Left Behind. So these are people who have put extraordinary pressure kind of on the administration, but also the American public to help, kind of get out our 60 to 80,000 Afghan allies. So what is the U.S. doing right now? And this is kind of my assessment. I think that we are negotiating with the Taliban to probably in a way that was not envisioned probably 24, 48 hours ago. But ultimately, it's to try to get as many of these individuals out as possible. Now, the problem is that the Taliban has the entire country and has surrounded the airport. So it's not like we can go around the country and pick them up. I think that a bold move from the administration would be for us to have access to airfields around Afghanistan, but I'm not sure that that's viable, and I'm not sure it's actually very safe for the U.S. military. But I would love to see that happen. But ultimately, there's going to be a push to, for as long as possible, stay on the ground at the Hamid Karzai airport. So as many Afghans as possible will be let in. Now, of course, there are Taliban checkpoints. I mean, and so I'm sure there's some delicate negotiations underway. I don't fault the administration right now for doing that. We're in a really tough bind now, but ultimately the only thing left is to try to get as many of these 60,000 plus out. I mean, the scenes you saw from a C-17 loaded with 640 people, which might have been, I read it was the kind of the biggest airlift of an aircraft in history. Those were extraordinary. And I think there's, as long as the airport can stay kind of viable and open, we're going to try to keep that open, keep that flow going as much as possible. The problem, of course, is people have to get to Kabul, and that's not an easy endeavor. Now, look, ultimately, I think this is not going to end very well. And as much as everyone is trying, and you try to be optimistic each day when you see each one of these flights take off, there's a lot of people kind of stuck out in the hinterlands. And make no mistake, the Taliban are going to have some reprisals against them. And so, we're feeling good that stuff, that we see some amazing scenes of repatriation. You saw, the governors of Maryland and Virginia today saying we're going to take Afghan refugees. But there's going to come a time where this flow stops, and it's going to be pretty ugly.
Yeah. So can people hear me now?
Yeah.
So I, first of all, apologize for the technical difficulties. I've actually been able to hear the whole show. I just haven't been able to be unmuted on screen. Thank you, Genevieve, for stepping in and saving the day. So I want to make a point about the nation building issue. I think almost every American who isn't supremely arrogant has learned a few lessons about nation building in the last 20 years. And even people who were the most gung-ho about Afghanistan and even Iraq, which was a much more aggressive nation building project than Afghanistan because it was more voluntary, are at least somewhat repentant or muted about it now. And I certainly count myself among the people who would not be as excited to undertake projects like this as before. There is a big difference between your cost of entry and your ease of exit. And there should be, when you're talking about changing the status quo, there's a bit of a Hippocratic principle, I think. Take any steps that could reasonably be expected to result in slavery for 10 million people. And, this isn't like, well, I walked into a room and turned on the lights, and now I'll walk out and turn off the light. This is a question where a situation where an enormous number of people have come to have a reliance interest on you keeping your promises and you doing the things that you say you're going to do, and so I think it does not answer the question to say why do we do so much nation building. Uh, that's a question for should we invade Afghanistan again sometime, but it doesn't really answer the question. Okay, what do you do when there are 10 million women and girls in the country who their only ability to avoid something between sex slavery and being shut up at home and not allowed to go to school and have no professional opportunities relies on a military presence that's ongoing. And I think there's a real question that people are too breezy about what the default state is. So that's all I have to say on the subject. Paula, the floor is yours. And GDF, feel free to mute me.
Hi, thank you for coming on. So my question is in regards to the planning. I've seen now from the New York Times and people like Matt Zeller that it seemed to be a little bit more negligent on part of the administration and actually ignoring intelligence that was warning them. And I also, on the current response, I've actually been quite shocked in what seems to me a quite slow, unaware, and strange response from the administration. Especially that speech to me that Joe Biden gave seemed to be quite unaware, like he had not been watching television and also not taking questions after the press conference. And I want to hear your thoughts on that. I feel like that might be a harsh
No, it's not harsh.
response.
No,
I feel unqualified to say that, but that,
no,
as an intelligent person, I feel shocked.
So first of all, I agree with you, entirely. If you've seen my Twitter meltdowns and others, I think you would see that I agree. And so there's a couple things. One is, a lot of us, including myself, I will admit, supported Joe Biden for president for a variety of reasons. A lot of mine had to do, of course, where America's state in the world was. But one of the things I've been shocked at, and this is not going to get me invited ever, back to the White House, is the lack of empathy right now for an individual who has been empathetic his entire career. Let me just give you, and I have to always say this because I've gotten destroyed by the right on Twitter on this. I interned for Joe Biden a billion years ago between undergrad and grad school at Cornell. He would never remember me in a million years. I did host him in the Middle East one time when I was in a manager in a station, 12, 13 years ago. But ultimately, he's someone I followed, and one of the appeals about him was that he was empathetic. His speech and the administration has shown a staggering lack of empathy towards the following, towards our Afghan allies. They, towards even the Afghan government gaslighting them relentlessly, which I think was an accelerant for this. And ultimately, Joe Biden's statement, President Biden's statement, several days ago, just about the future plight of women and girls in Afghanistan. So that's been really shocking to me, and I think it's something that I think a lot of and one of the things that I think that is a good trait about a lot of us, particularly in national security, particularly those who supported Joe Biden in his presidential run, is that we are extremely critical now because we are so disappointed. This is, to me, is a staggering disappointment. Someone who had 4 decades of foreign policy experience, but really had that empathy card. And so whether he was dealing with the Kurds of Iraq or his trips to Afghanistan or all of his trips to the Middle East, his ability, which is based on his background, as which is essentially a blue collar background, from Delaware, that has all evaporated. And that, to me, I'm watching him, and maybe this is going to not ring well with the viewers now. It was kind of Trumpy. There was some Trumpism involved here. In what he said, just about this kind of cold calculating, the Afghans screwed this all up and we're out. I was very disappointed with this.
Mark, I share your disappointment, but I want to say in defense of Biden on this point, and maybe also in defense of Trump on this point, they've both been quite consistent about it.
Right.
It actually is not a situation where Biden was talking empathically about this situation until he got into office. And Trump's attitude has always been, anti-interventionist. He's had more in common with the anti-interventionist left than with his own political party on this, and so it actually seems to me that it's an area that they both come by kind of honestly, and what they both did in cooperation with one another, frankly, is a reflection of a kind of bipartisan consensus that has thrown its hands up in the air at people like you and me who kind of believe that there is, good to be done. I wonder if are we wrong to be. Maybe we're wrong to be disappointed. This is exactly what he said he was going to do.
Well, I would argue that what Joe Biden has consistently said over the years is that we should have a small, robust CT capability in Afghanistan. That was his position, and that's what he argued, during his time as vice president. So I hear what you're saying. I think that I would have been. I think I would have found more comfort, and I think the consistency would have been if he said leave a residual force. This completely disengagement again. America has to be. I argue, and that's what the CIA is all about. That's what Special Operations Forces are all about. We are a forward, deployed outfit. I mean,
pointing end of the spear.
We are, the concept of defend forward is what we do. That means leaving a little of us all over the place. I'm okay with that. That's what I signed up for, and I thought he was as well. That's a big difference than 150,000 U.S. troops in Afghanistan. One thing that we haven't talked about, if you don't, because I think I don't know. I think in the remaining time is kind of how our CT capability has been eroded, and I think that I'm really concerned about that because ultimately, what we had that made us really good was and frankly, it's our manhunting ability, our ability to find, fix, and finish and kill terrorists was based on three factors. It was based on our human intelligence. It was based on signals intelligence. It was based on ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. That's eyes in the sky. That's drones and surveillance aircraft. And what has happened over the last 72 hours has really degraded that. Our human, which really was going to be focused on a small residual presence, centered in Kabul, perhaps at the embassy, that's gone now. And we don't have a partner in the Afghan, the Afghan intelligence service. So we have nobody. So that is really degraded. Same thing with SIGINT. We need facilities there to do this. And in terms of ISR, which is surveillance aircraft, the transition to this was so rushed that you saw American officials scrambling around the region trying to get basing rights for aircraft, and God knows they're going to fly from the Gulf. And so ultimately, our CT capabilities, and Bill Burns has said this publicly, were degraded even in a scenario where August 31st and there's a transitional Afghan government. It is now accelerating. It's now even much worse with a full Taliban takeover. And so I think that and then of course you see the prison breaks and at the prison outside of Bagram with really some hardcore AQ members and reports of AQ members coming from Iran. I think that in my old kind of sphere of work, counterterrorism, people back at Langley are like, oh crap, here we go again. And I think there's a serious problem ahead for us. Because not only we talk about terrorist groups flourish in ungoverned spaces. We don't have an ungoverned space. We have a medieval terrorist entity as the government in Afghanistan. That and so I think there is some concern there. Now are these people going to attack America tomorrow? No. But the idea of Al Qaeda kind of reconstituting, I think there's legitimate concern on this. I think we are less safe over what's happened.
I want to just add one thing to that, which will ring true with Mark and I suspect some of the rest of you. One of the things that the Taliban did in the period in which they were in government was they were the kind of proto-ISIS, that they seized a territory and they were an inspiration to people from all over the world, including some Americans, to come to Afghanistan because it was a pure Islamic society, hundreds and thousands of people from the Gulf. And this is exactly what ISIS did when it seized territory. It encouraged people to come. people find this inspiring, and those people become a very substantial terrorism problem. And I would not be surprised if there are a lot of people in the Gulf, in certain parts of North Africa, who are going to be very inspired to migrate to Afghanistan over the next couple of years. And that's a pretty scary thing from a CT perspective.
Ben, we've seen that happen. We've seen that. There's a European security official quoted in the press today saying that they've already seen online chatter of people really being inspired by this. And so that's a concern. Yep.
Yeah, it's going to happen, and it's going to be bad. I mean, Tom, you get the last question today.
And I'll be quick. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Listen, I already got what you think about trusting the Taliban and their moral character. But is it in their interest to honor this idea that until August 31st, they'll let everybody who wants to get out? Now, I realize you said they're way out in the countryside. They're not going to make it, but let's just take that girls' school in, Kabul. Are they going to let those people out because we got 7,000 troops sitting there right now? Okay, I mean, we do have sort of a bigger force than what we had before we started disarming.
Well, there is some irony there. Yes, I mean, that's been pointed out. But look, no. I mean, first of all, those who are eligible to leave on the SIV, the special immigrant, the visa status, are those allies of ours. That's not the girls' schools. They can't get out. We're talking about individuals and their families who help the United States government. But of course, the Taliban has encircled Kabul airport or Hamid Karzai airport, and so there is a question of even those that would be eligible, are they going to be able to get out? So I think ultimately they can't be trusted. There is a bit of a propaganda game going on right now. You already see China and Russia, hinting at establishing kind of diplomatic relations. But ultimately, make no mistake, there will be severe kind of retribution, and the Taliban, and as we know right now, are certainly hunting and searching for those who ally themselves to the United States. So I don't think they can be trusted. And the final point, which I think is really important, is they don't care about Western legitimacy. And I will argue this till I'm blue in the face. They absolutely do not care. And so there's.
So I'm sorry, Mark. Can I just interrupt? Why the charm offensive if they don't care about legitimacy?
Because when I said Western legitimacy, I think that they're obviously their propaganda arm has been quite successful as they're getting support from Russia and China. But in terms of from the West, I mean, I saw something. Which it was a UN official today who said that he was cautiously optimistic that the Taliban would honor agreements about women. I mean, that's ludicrous. And so ultimately they don't care. And again, I could be proven entirely wrong. I'm basing my experience with them. This is a medieval group which it does not respect, the rights of women, of minorities. There's incredible barbarism. There was massacres under their control and command. There are already reports of them kind of laying out, their type of justice, which is chopping off limbs. I think we are in a really kind of strange period now. They do want the United States out, and so it's in their interest to kind of play nice a little bit, and they'll kind of tweak us a little bit in terms of China and Russia. But this is not an entity that can be trusted, or certainly, in my view, should not be kind of recognized, certainly by the United States, based on kind of their history of barbarism. Look, the world is going to have a wait and see attitude on what they do. It's simple as that. I have a very pessimistic view. Maybe some UN officials think differently, but I think ultimately, there's going to be reports from people on the ground and what they do in the weeks and months to come.
I still remember the first time they were in power. The international community, some do-gooder in the international community approved a grant to build a soccer stadium in Kabul.
Oh, good God.
And they used it for public executions.
Can I tell one story on that? Because this is a really important story, and this is a story that's cleared by the agency. But when I went into Kandahar in early 2002, I found a widow of an agent of ours, of an Afghan who had been one of those, infamously hung at the Kandahar soccer stadium. And I went and I gave kind of our death benefits to this widow, and I'll never forget this. And it was through a screen because I wasn't allowed to see her face to face. But I think the scenes from those soccer stadiums that we're gonna see that again.
On that cheerful note,
Right.
Marc Polymeropoulos, you're a great American. It's great to see your face and hear your voice again. And sorry, it is under these unfortunate and grim circumstances. However, we will be back tomorrow. I don't know who our guest is going to be yet, but I do know that guest will be here 22 hours and 54 minutes from now. And until then, Scott.
Oh, geez. This has been one of the most interesting, draining, engrossing shows I've been part of. And it's because we're so lucky to have people like Mark who interned for Joe Biden and spend 30
I'm going to tilt. There's a picture. It's a picture. Where is it? It's back in my thing somewhere. There it is, right there.
Oh, that's right. Anyway, we can't have fun anymore, but we can have morally serious, intellectually important conversations on issues that matter. So thank you so much.